Today on Bridges, we're going to talk about some of the joys and challenges of being a blended family, being a step parent. And first, we're going to be on location. We're going to talk to the author of a book called The Smart Stepmom. And then we'll be back in the studio where I'm going to talk with a couple who have now been married for 18 years, but they had a blended family, and they're going to share their very touching story. Laura, I am so glad to have you on Bridges today.
Thank you.
Your book, or one of your books is what I should say, is The Smart Stepmom.
Yes.
And I've wanted for years to be able to talk to you about this book. Tell me about The Smart Stepmom.
Well, the Smart Stepmom came to be because I was asked to write a book on being a stepmom. And to be honest, in the beginning, I did not want to do it because I did not think I was a great stepmom. I just thought, what do I have to tell anybody about being a stepmother? And the Lord just would not leave it alone. He just kept pressing and pressing. And so when I prayed about it, it was just like, Laura, tell them what you've learned. Yeah. That's all they want to know. They want to know how you survived. They want to know how you ended up married 32 years and you know, you're still married. It's still going. Yeah.
You have to be a smart stepmom because you've survived. Yeah. They've survived, right?
Yes. And, you know, it really is true. 3 out of 4 stepfamilies don't make it. And I'm not trying to be a doom and gloom, but you really need to get educated on what it's going to take to make it. Yeah. And that's primarily what happens, is that people don't recognize not only how much work it's going to take, but what to do. There's very little out there to explain to them, I haven't ever dealt with this before. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. What is my role? What isn't my role? So that's why the book.
And so all of that information is in the book, The Smart Stepmom, tips, tools, practical advice, all that sort of thing. How do people survive as a smart stepmom? Because my friends, you know, they thought that they could kind of mother and nurture this child, and the child is like, you're not my mom, not happening. So where does somebody start?
Well, they start with understanding first that the reason that stepfamilies are complicated is because all stepfamilies are birthed out of loss. Now, people don't like it when I say that. They think that I'm saying the marriage is not built on love. And that's not what I'm saying. I am saying that in order for the stepfamily to have occurred, to even form, there has to have been a death, a divorce, or the breakup of a relationship.
Absolutely.
So it's that foundational understanding. We're building this on top of emotions like fear, loss, anger, grief, resentment. There's all kinds of emotions that you don't have in a first-time marriage, especially in the children. And so that is the first thing that it takes, is to admit, don't view that as something negative. My stepfamily was birthed out of a loss, and I need to figure out what those losses created in the hearts of my spouse, in the hearts of the ex-spouse, and in the hearts of my stepchildren. Then you have to recognize I need to learn my role. Is my role just to come alongside my husband and be an advocate for him and a partner with him? Is my role to be a mom in the lives of these children? And that will be determined by so many factors. How often do I have the children? What age are the children? Will they let me in? There's just so many factors to consider there. So then you got to figure out, what's my role?
And how did you figure out what your role was?
A lot of mistakes, you know, a lot of trial and error. And there was no resource when I got married, so there was nothing to read to guide me. And so I finally, I can tell you the turning point, that I finally realized, to my stepsons, I am their father's wife.
Okay.
Now see, women hear that and they get very upset, or they cry, or no, I want to be more than that. But what if that's what you are to your stepsons, stepchildren? This is my dad's wife. Why does that have to be a negative thing?
It shouldn't have to be.
Why can't that be enough? Now, not every case is like that. Some stepkids will let you be more, and that's wonderful. Over time, it's just you can't push that. Sometimes they feel disloyal to their mom if they let you be more. They may want you to be more, But
Right.
if they know that will hurt their mother, they'll drop you like a hot potato.
Exactly.
That's their mother.
That's right. And that the stepmom has to be smart enough.
Yes.
It's the smart stepmom.
Yes.
And mature enough
That's
to
right.
realize that in some cases, some of that behavior or whatever, it's not about you at all.
It is not about you. I'd say probably 80%.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about loving their mom.
Yes.
So for the smart stepmom, because like not only do you get these, some people call them bonus children, stepchildren, however you want to call
Yes.
them. Sometimes there is an ex-spouse. Mm-hmm. And that can be really hard for women and for men. Are there
Yes.
tips in here about that?
Absolutely. In all that I write on stepmoms, I always include a chapter. We call her the ex-wife-in-law.
The ex-wife-in-law. I've never heard that before. The
Because she
ex-wife-in-law.
is part of your family, whether you want her to be or not, whether she's alive or dead, whether she lives 2 miles away or 200 miles away. And when you get married to someone with children, that former spouse is a part of your life.
Wow. Did you realize that when
No.
you got married? I'm glad that you were honest, because I think most people don't. Like you go to the altar and you say, I do, and you think, okay, this is us.
Right.
And then you find out, in your case, obviously, this is a she, the ex-wife-in-law. Is
Right.
that what I say?
Right.
She's going to be a part of it because they're kids.
That's right.
And she's
And they're
gonna-
her kids.
Yes, they are her kids. And she has thoughts, feelings, and opinions about them
Yes.
being with you.
And you can't
Maybe.
control what goes on in her home.
Right.
The way she parents, or he, if it's a, you know, a dad, the way that ex-spouse parents, you have no control over that. You have no control over that home that now affects your home. Because what the children learn and do and can do in the discipline, what movies they're allowed to watch, what they eat, everything that goes on in that other home comes then into your home when they come to your house, and your children that you may have,
Because you might have children with the husband.
or from a previous.
Right.
So your own biological children are affected by these children that come from another home. And you can't control what they're learning or hearing or seeing or experiencing over there, unless it's illegal. I mean, we're not talking that kind of thing.
Of course.
But, and that is such a shock. It's such an ambush. Like, oh my gosh.
Was there a place, Laura, that you came like okay with that, realizing that the kids are doing this over here in the ex-wife-in-law's house? And how do you cope with that in your house? What did you do?
Well, I wanted to leave, to be honest with you. In the early years, I was like, this is not what I signed up for. I didn't realize, I didn't know it was going to be this complicated. I don't want to stay here. I love you,
Yes, I understand.
but this is my life now. And so I had to get very quiet with God. And I knew I wanted to honor my vows. I knew I did not want to be divorced again. I had my first husband walked out and left me divorced, and a divorce I did not want. And I knew that I needed to honor my vows. And so I just went to God very simply and said, if you don't teach me how to become a wife and a stepmom, it's going to get very ugly around here. And I need you to give me the mind of Christ. And becoming a stepmom with God's help is the most Christ-like thing. I've been a Christian 37 years. I learned how to serve and to be unselfish and to live as Christ by seeking to become a smart stepmom more than anything else I've ever experienced in my life.
Wow.
Not a stroke, not the death of a parent, not all kinds of other ugly things in my life. Being a stepmom, if I was going to become a smart stepmom, I had to learn to serve, not knowing if I would ever get a thank you, or you did the right thing, or I appreciate you. I may never get recognized for that. I did it for Christ and to honor my vow.
you know, when you're dealing with children, you don't know if you're going to get anything back.
No, especially if they don't want you.
Right. Because you're just, you know, injected in their lives, so
That's
to speak,
right.
as well. Well, I want to thank you, Laura, for
Thank
coming
you.
and for sharing today. It's been good to have this conversation.
I appreciate it. Thanks for your heart for step families.
You can purchase a copy of today's show for $15. Call us at 615-754-0039 or send a check to the address on the screen. Please mention the program number on the screen.
If you're just joining us today on Bridges, we're talking about the joys and the challenges of being a step parent. And right now I have a couple. They've been happily married for 18 years now, and they're going to share their story and how they learned to handle the joys and the challenges of step parenting. So I'm so glad that the two of you could come today. I want to welcome you, Tyler, to Bridges. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
And it is so good to have you as well, Diane.
Thank you.
Diane, let's start out with, tell me a little bit about your story and how you two came to meet and how he came to be a stepdad.
My late husband was killed by a drunk driver in 1996.
How old were you when that happened?
I was 31.
So you were young, very young.
And so we had a daughter who was 2.5. Her name's Shannon. And less than a week after 2 days after we buried Jim was my husband's name, and found out I was pregnant with our son. Didn't know he was a boy until he was born.
Right.
But he's 20 today.
Yeah.
And his name is Christopher.
Christopher.
And so...
Yeah. So that had to be a lot for you at such a young age to lose your late husband to a drunk driver and then find out you were pregnant. Were you a Christian at the time?
I was. I was. And so that was a big blessing because, you know, you have your family, which my family's a wonderful family, and Jim's family's a wonderful family, and all Christians. And so just having that and then church family was very helpful during that time. And funny how it came to be is Tyler's dad was the preacher of our church. And so we had been friends. So Tyler and I had been friends. And a little funny story is he was a single guy back then. And Jim and I were always trying to find him somebody to date.
Were they always trying to matchmake for you?
Well, I don't say always, but I have a clear memory of them and me sitting at the kitchen table and them trying to name certain people for me to potentially date.
Yeah.
And I kept saying, no, they're too old, or they're too young, or there's nobody here. So, yeah.
So you knew her late husband, Jim. You were friends.
Yes, we were friends. I would say that he, at that time, was probably my best friend. I may not have been his best friend as far as, because he had other men in his life that he had known since like high school. Jim and I's relationship at that point had only been about 4 years old or so.
Yeah. But he was important to you.
Oh, yeah, he was very important.
So this was a huge and tragic loss for you as well.
Oh, yes, yes. We helped teach the youth group there at the church there together. We went on events with the youth group, did a lot with the youth group. Had a very bad softball team that we played on.
But we're laughing, so it's good memories, right?
So, you know, things like that, but yeah.
Yeah. So that was a tragic loss for you, and you're dealing with, you know, because a pregnancy
Yes.
is a joy.
It is.
And yet at the same time you're processing grief.
Right. It was a challenging time. It was a challenging time, but I had lots and lots of support.
Yeah. I love hearing that.
Lots of support.
Yeah.
So it was, my sister, her friends at work would ask her, how's your sister doing? And she said, you know, I think her faith is going to get her through.
Amen.
And it did. It really did.
Yeah. So you go through the pregnancy and have a beautiful baby boy?
Yes. Yes. And that was a great day and a sad day. And so trying to just balance those emotions, the beautiful thing was my mom got to be in I had a C-section, and so she got to be in the room and watch her grandson be born. And so that was a special time, although we all wanted Jim to be there.
Of course.
Because he was there when Shannon was born. But but it was special for that reason. And but we had a lot of deep emotional not having him there.
Yeah.
And but it was wonderful, and we knew it. I knew what his name would be when, if he was a boy. Like, we didn't know until he was born, because
Right.
I liked the surprise of life. And Jim's name was James Christopher, so I just reversed his name to Christopher James.
Christopher James, all right. So,
So-
since you all were friends, were you able to, you know, see her during the pregnancy? Did you interact?
No, that wasn't my role. We were friends. I was much closer with Jim.
Gotcha.
The relationship I had with Diane at the time, actually the first time I ever met Diane was in the church office, because at that time she was the church secretary. Therefore, she was my dad's secretary. So, you know, on paper that looks a little weird if you don't explain it right. But anyways, no, my role during that time was I took very seriously about the charge Jesus and the Bible gives about taking care of widows and orphans. So at the time, after Jim's death, I felt a call to minister to Diane in an indirect way. Indirect way, really. Indirect meaning that I wasn't preaching at her, or we weren't necessarily studying the Bible together. But what I was doing was I would take her out, not as a date, but as to help her feel like she was more than a mom. And so I would get her
Very
outside of the
sweet.
house.
Very sweet. He
It's
had no idea what that meant.
It's extremely sweet, and I think that all of you, as you watch, we're hearing about how God can work in the midst of what are tragic circumstances, and there can be days of great celebration and yet sadness sometimes at the loss of someone, but how God continues to work in our lives. It's very sweet. So you really had no idea that you would marry at some point.
No.
No, he says.
No. And like most men, I would be the last to know.
Did you know first? Or did you-
Yes, I'm sure that I knew first. In fact, I'm pretty sure I chased a little. But we had to work through something that I wasn't even aware of, and he had such a knowing where things were, because I think out of the loneliness of my life at that time, I was wanting something.
Of course.
And he was being so sweet and so kind. But from his realm, it looked like I'm just, being this guy who's being a friend. And from my viewpoint, it felt a little towards the romantic side. And so I got a little mixed up there, and we had a conversation one night, and I said, "What are we doing here?" And I said, "Are we dating?" And he was like, had this look on his face like, "No." And I was so surprised, because I had mixed it up thinking that was happening. Yeah. And he said, we're both grieving. You're grieving Jim, your husband. I'm grieving Jim, my friend. And I don't want to build a relationship on that. And so I had to take a step back, which was challenging. But I think it also might have opened a door.
It did, because at that time, I was having a hard time not looking at Diane as anything but Jim's wife. I had to, in a sense, sort of reprogram my mind, because it wasn't fair to her if I was going to continue this ministry, I guess. If I kept doing the same things over and over again and misleading her heart, if I didn't have that intention.
Yeah.
And in fact, that night after that conversation, I went home to my dad and said, "Dad, I think I crushed Diane." I was really worried about her. I was worried about what I did. I didn't intend to do anything wrong.
And you didn't.
I didn't.
Just and sometimes we get confused in life, and I can totally understand what you're saying. You're lonely, you're grieving, you've lost your husband, you're young, you've got, children. So at some point it does become romantic, because you've been married for 18 years. And so for you, that really means taking on the role of being a stepdad. Not only did you have faith, but you did things in the natural realm, like focus on the family and conferences. You did things to help you prepare to take on the role of being a stepdad. What are some of the joys of being a stepdad?
Wow. Well, for me, we married in '99, so at that time, Shannon had just turned 5, and Christopher had just turned 2. So it's instant kids, instant kids that you're with. Now, I had known both of them since they were born, just not as directly. So I get thrown into the mix, and it's a little like you're a camp director all of a sudden. You're going in there and you're trying to figure things out. I didn't even know how to change a diaper until we started dating. I didn't even, you know, a little funny aside, I didn't even know diapers were, some diapers were Velcro. I was still looking for the tab, the stick tab, and I didn't know how to get it on. And I couldn't call my dad because I'd get the Bill Cosby father-son treatment, you know. So
it's instant dad and lots of stuff. How about for you? You know, how does it work? Because you're grieving the loss of your first husband, and your children, they're his children, and he's gone, and now you've got a stepdad. How do you prepare, and how do you deal with it?
Well, it's way different when you date, when you have children, because you're not having the fun. Well, I mean, you're having the fun, but you're not having the fun. Go out and come home, and oh yeah, that was good, and who's next,
you had
or whatever.
responsibilities.
I had to, and then how do we do kids? And I mean, he knew them, so it wasn't like we had to kind of hide them off to the side and maybe introduce them later. They knew him, and so we were such good friends before, and it just became more of that and more of that. And so one day, I mean, we had already decided that we were going to get married, and I said to Shannon, who was 4, I said to her, I said, oh, hey, it would be Daddy's birthday this Saturday. And she looked at me, and then she looked over at him, because he was in the room, and she said, that Daddy? And I said, well, no, honey, I said, it would be Daddy up in heaven's birthday this Saturday. And she thought about it a minute. She goes, is it okay if I call him Daddy? And I said, yes, honey, it's perfectly okay that you call him Daddy. And so for Shannon, because she was the oldest, she's never known him as a stepdad, even though the world sees him as a stepdad. She's always just known him as her daddy. She had a daddy up in heaven, and she has a daddy here. And that's, to this day, she's 23, and that's how she feels. And Christopher, too.
That's wonderful. Did you ever feel like a stepdad, like maybe you shouldn't discipline, or was it hard for you to love them, like, unconditionally when you thought they were really wrong, or?
Okay. The best way I know how to answer that is a twofold answer. One is I've had the gift, I guess, from the Lord that I just love the kids. I love them as if they were my own. Diane gave me a gift years ago, before we got married. She asked me a very important question. She asked me how I would feel if we never had children together. And I told her that night, or that day, whatever it was, I told her, I said, if we never have kids of our own, these two, Shannon and Christopher, will be enough. I love them just as if they were mine. And so that, I guess, sort of sealed the deal for her. But that let her know that I wasn't making it so important that our marriage, that our family was based on us having kids.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from the two of you, that even though you had challenges, like all families do, you really relied on the Lord and did everything that you could do to prepare to walk through these things. Would you say that that's right?
I would, because that was a really important moment, because we were young, and could we have more children? And for Jim and I, our children being here, Christopher's a flat-out miracle in my book, and so there were issues at hand for us to have children, and so I didn't know if we could have any more children. And I thought, he's a young guy who might want his own child at some point, and what will that mean if we can't, if the infertility thing happens? because it did happen for Jim and I. I'm amazed that Shannon's an answer to prayer and Christopher's a miracle. And so I needed to know how he felt about that, because how would it be? And I remember his exact words to my question, you know, about more children and what would that look like. And his answer was, if God only ever gives me Shannon and Christopher to raise, I will be a happy and fulfilled man. That is what he said to me. Well, who doesn't love that?
Who doesn't love that? I mean, I love that. That is the most wonderful, I mean, it's a beautiful love story. And yet, you know, there's the tragedy of losing your first husband to a drunk driver. And so have you been able to mourn his loss and celebrate all the victories that you have and still honor his memory?
Oh, sure. I mean, you know, mourning his loss, that was a big deal back then. It's been 21 years ago. Wow. I find that hard to believe, but we still talk about Jim every day. He comes up in conversation, and here's the beauty of it. Because they were friends, Jim and Tyler, it's never this issue of like, I can't talk about him.
Yeah.
Shannon and Christopher can talk about him. Of course, Christopher never knew him.
Right.
And we always told Christopher he would meet him in the mirror, and he has. I mean, Shannon misses her daddy.
Of course.
Up in heaven. She doesn't have much memory of him. She was 2.5. But I think she would love to have a conversation with him.
Of course.
And I'm sad for that, even today.
Yeah, I can see that, and I can understand that. But what I hear you all saying as far as being a blended, being a step family, is that you've all been loving and unselfish so that you could honor Jim's memory and not have that hurt you, Tyler, as her husband, and you're okay.
Right. I always told the kids that it was okay to ask questions about Dad, to talk about Jim. I never tried to suppress it. I never felt like I was in competition with him.
Right, because you're not.
You know, the other part of my answer from earlier, the second part was choice. You make a choice to love somebody. You know, it's easy to love somebody when things are going well and you're having successes. You know, it's those hard times as humans where we actually have to make the choice. And I didn't wake up every day and go, oh, I'm choosing to love Diane or I'm choosing to love the kids. But during those hard times, I remembered that I loved the kids.
Amen.
And I loved Diane.
Amen. And that's what it takes every day. I want to thank you so much for coming and for sharing your story.
Sure.
And I know that you all have been blessed as we have listened to this story and what it takes to be a step parent, to be a blended family, a lot of love and a lot of giving of ourselves. So we appreciate you joining us. We say goodbye and God bless.
For more information on a guest, visit our website, ctntv.org.